Lymphatic system is not its own system. It is actually part of what larger system? The immune system. When we talk about the lymphatic system in here, we're really talking about the structural components of the immune system. Because when we do the immune system, really the immune system is different than most other systems. It's spread all over the body. It's got parts in all different kinds of tissues. So one of the main structural parts of the immune system we call the lymphatic system. The real huge cells of the immune system are blood cells, though. Which kind of blood cells? White blood cells. So let's not forget that. When we're doing the lymphatic system, we're really doing lymphatic and immune. We kind of separate them according to function. But this chapter, lymphatic, goes right with the immune chapter. These concepts are all the same. Therefore, when we are talking about the cells of the lymphatic system, we're really talking mainly about white blood cells, lymphocytes, and macrophages. Okay? Lymphocytes and macrophages. We have seen lymphocytes under a slide. We know they have a big, huge, large nucleus. What we may not be aware of yet is there's a couple of different types. There's another type that we'll get more specific on when we get to the immune system itself. But the two generalized lymphocytes are called T cells and B cells, or T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. They look the same. If we saw them, we couldn't tell the difference. The difference is in what they do. Frankly, I don't want to go through all the differences with you right now, because we're going to do that in chapter 21. We'll talk about the difference between T cells and B cells. It will mention it on the slides here. We don't need to try to learn it yet. Once we learn it for chapter 21, we'll own it for chapter 20, and there's no need in talking about it prematurely. So just realize, we have T cells and B cells. We also have macrophages. Okay? Now this is what the generalized lymphatic tissue would look like. In AMP1, when we do histology here at the college, this is one tissue that we don't actually see. When we do connective tissue, we talk about dense regular. You may remember that. Dense irregular in the skin, collagen fibers go in all different kinds of directions. We did some elastic fibers in loose areolar connective tissue. Also some elastic fibers in certain cartilage that's found in the ear, elastic cartilage, you may remember that. Reticular tissue is the tissue of the lymphatic organs. You'll find this in the bone marrow, the spleen. Find it in the tonsil. You'll find it in the lymph node. As you see here, it is a loose type of connective tissue. See all the spaces there? That should help you to see that. Look, I have composed a slide that has this on there, so you'll be able to get it later right after the picture. Reticular connective tissue is a type of loose connective tissue. Here's the deal. These fibers are smaller than collagen. Some people consider them fine collagen fibers, in fact. But these are thinner fibers that are very similar to collagen, just smaller. It's called reticular fibers. Okay, what's the purpose? Our lymphatic system is there to filter tissue fluid, correct? So we will have this reticular tissue here, and white blood cells will attach to it. And they will wait for the tissue fluid to be filtered through here. Let's say this happens to be, if this was a lymph node, material would come through there, and the white blood cells would be located there so that they could detoxify it. Maybe if they were phagocytes, they could eat it up. Maybe they could release some antibodies. They could do whatever they need to do. So the concept is reticular connective tissue has lots of spaces so that the immune system cells can migrate through there and do what they need to do. What are the major kind of cells that we're talking about when we say white blood cells? Lymphocytes and macrophages. Yes, sir, what's your question? The macrophages do. They will actually eat. They will physically eat some cellular debris or microorganisms. Yes. Now, they don't just eat. They also release chemicals that help to neutralize, like antibodies. And your T cells can perform their functions as well. They're doing kind of immune surveillance there, getting introduced to stuff. Oh yeah, our only exception, the thymus is the only lymphatic organ that's not made of reticular connective tissue. The thymus is different. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Okay, lymph nodes. Lymph nodes look like that. You can listen to the lab integrity to learn all the parts of a lymph node. Okay? What I will say here, though, is this. Lymph nodes have more vessels leading in. We call those afferent lymphatics. Talked about it in lab. Than they have vessels leading out. The purpose of this is to allow the fluid to come in this side of the lymph node through its vessels, to build up in the lymph node and to get circulated through the lymph node, pushed through the different various compartments, because it's kind of compartmentalized by the parts of the capsule that penetrate in that we call trabeculi. So the more places that this fluid flows, the more it gets filtered, so to speak, filtered by the white blood cells, by either the T cells or the B cells or the macrophages or really all of them. Any filter that filters with white blood cells, we could call a biological filter, and you'll see that in the slide in a little bit. Concept, once again, multiple vessels leading in. It can't just stream straight across. It kind of circulates through, fewer vessels leading out, so it kind of backs up in here, which allows for the filtering to occur, allows the white blood cells to have time to act upon that material. And then the fluid continues on, and it may go to another lymph node. It may go a little further along the chain, get filtered again, eventually return back to the blood where? Subclavian veins. Very good. Commonly, in the germinal center of those lymph nodes, that is where the B lymphocytes reside, in the germinal center. We remember that this is the medullary region down here. The sinuses are open spaces there. That's where the macrophages hang out. They hang out in the open spaces and they phagocytize material. The T cells love to hang out in these deeper areas of the cortex down here. So we kind of have B cells in their germinal centers, T cells through the deep part of the cortex, and macrophages in the sinuses. Now, B cells and T cells also get into the medulla, but they're on the cords, and I don't usually separate the difference between the cords and the sinuses. So commonly what we do is we talk about the medullary region having macrophages, and we generically say that throughout the cortex we have, in this deeper part, we have the T cells, and out here in the germinal centers we have B cells. Now, these aren't the only white blood cells that are there. There's other kinds of cells as well. There's cells called dendritic cells that hang out here and play a role too. But we don't necessarily need to talk about every little thing associated with this system. Right. And you can see this slide happens to summarize that along with this slide right here. So if you choose to watch this integrity, you can pause it. And it states everything that I just let you know. Cool. So here's our other picture from our book. Here are what our actual slides on campus look like. It looks a little better on a computer, but frankly, These aren't the greatest slides in the world. Here we see the capsule around the lymph node. We see the subcapsular sinus, the space here. Here we see a lymphatic follicle. We actually don't see a germinal center even though it would be in here. And what do we call the capsule parts that penetrate down here? We call that trabeculi. Here's zoomed up just on the subcapsular sinus. Oh, cool. Lymphocytes. Lots of lymphocytes here and other cells as well. Spleen. Okay, the spleen is different from the lymph node because the spleen does not filter lymph. Its job is to filter blood. So the spleen has blood going in and blood going out. It has arteries leading into it, a splenic artery and a splenic vein leading out of it. You can see that in the picture. Within the spleen, you may remember that two major kinds of tissue are called white pulp and red pulp. The white pulp surrounds arteries that they like to call central arteries. There are sinuses throughout as well. Commonly, the white pulp consists of lymphocytes, and the red pulp is close to the sinuses, and that's where more of the macrophages love to hang out. Macrophages love to hang out in the red pulp. And the spleen is made to destroy red blood cells. It is the main site in the body of red blood cell destruction because it has macrophages that break down those red blood cells, help play a role in processing the different parts. Yep, lots of dead red blood cells in the red pulp. Remember, on the slide in our class, we will see the white pulp actually looks dark on the slide because the lymphocytes are so dense. The red pulp appears a little more pale because there's more space out there. And right here, hard to focus on, but that hole right there is the lumen of a blood vessel called a central artery. If it's really small, we could call it a central arteriole. That's a blood vessel. So when we see this, we would say, here's red pulp, here's white pulp, and here's a central artery. What is this out here? That is a capsule. If it penetrated inward, we would say trabeculi. Good. Here are the slides, once again, that mention the functions. Filters blood, we already talked about that. Helps to process the old red blood cells, destroy red blood cells. It's a location where lymphocytes can multiply. When we talk about the immune system, we'll talk about surveillance and what T cells do and what B cells do. And in the spleen, they're playing a role in the immune system. Platelets can be stored in the spleen in a little bitty growing, developing baby that we might call a fetus. Red blood cells are formed in the spleen. That doesn't happen after we are born, but before birth it does. And the spleen can also function as a blood reservoir. It can store blood. Can you live without a spleen? Yes, because if you lose your spleen, other organs just take over the functions, which is pretty cool. The thymus gland. We did not see a lab slide. So picture's not super important for us because we're not going to see a picture of it in lab. The thymus gland is located where? In your throat? No, in your thoracic cavity, under your sternum, towards the top of the heart, and in between some of the major blood vessels there. Your thymus gland is the largest when you're young. So it's small when you're a kid, and as you become a teenager, it's growing, and then it shifts. At some point in your teen years, it quits growing, and it actually starts to go backwards and to degenerate, and a lot of it gets replaced by connective tissue. So we say that the thymus gland is the largest in childhood, and it actually atrophies, that's our word for shrinks, in adulthood. What is the space between the lungs called? Mediastinum. That's where your thymus is. Mediastinum. Remember, the thymus is not reticular connective tissue. It is different. The thymus also is where T cells mature. Or we'll use a fancy word in a little bit, where they become immunocompetent, where they learn how to play a role in your immune system. The reason that T cells or T lymphocytes are called T cells is because they do this in the thymus. The thymus is all about T cells. That will become important when we talk about the immune system and the difference between T cells and B cells. The thymus also has epithelial tissue, and so, as we know, epithelial tissue, cuboidal epithelium, can commonly function as a gland, and the thymus actually makes hormones that we learned about in the endocrine system that help play a role in the development of the T cells and the immune system. So, because of its endocrine tissue that does that, the thymus actually makes some hormones. In addition to being immune, we could also discuss it with the endocrine system. Here is a tonsil. You have three groups of tonsils. Pharyngeal. Those are actually up in the back of the throat behind the nose. They are commonly referred to as adenoids. You have your main tonsils on the side of your throat at the back of your mouth called the palatine tonsils. And then at the base of the tongue, that's where the tongue attaches in the throat, you have some tonsils called lingual tonsils. Tonsils are special because, unlike lymph nodes, they have no afferent vessels leading into them. You'll remember this was discussed in the lab. The tonsils are in your throat somewhere. And what happens is the material that passes over them comes down into these spaces and gets into these crevices called crypts. And then the tonsil pulls it in and uses its lymphatic tissue, its lymphocytes and macrophages to neutralize that material, whatever it might be. The tonsils definitely have follicles. We barely see them in this picture. They're so tiny. Here's one, a big one, with a little portion of a crypt right here, and then zoomed up on a follicle of a tonsil. Tonsils are unique because their capsule is not connective like most capsules. What is their capsule? Very good. It's the same kind of epithelium that's found in the mouth. In fact, it's called stratified squamous epithelium. And look, you can see that right here. If we could zoom up on that. See the basement membrane, kind of look at the multiple cells there. It's tough to tell really, but that's stratified squamous epithelium. Can you live without your tonsils? Yes. What's the main reason they take tonsils out nowadays? Sleep apnea. Difficulty breathing at night. Tonsils are so big in some people who aren't here tonight that they have them removed because it makes them snore. Strep throat used to be the main reason. Recurrent tonsillitis from strep throat back in the day, but that's secondary to the other now. So you can have your tonsils out without getting a lot of tonsillitis and sore throats.